Welcome, and thank you so much for joining us today. I'm Dr. Abby Zoltik, Director of Education for the Veterinary Association for Farm Animal Welfare. For those of you unfamiliar with VAFA, our mission is to advocate for animals used in food and fiber production by providing a veterinary perspective grounded in animal welfare and ethics. We achieve this through education, policy development, and advocacy. If you are not yet a member of VAFA but would like to become one, please send us your name through the Q&A box located at the bottom of your Zoom screen or visit www.vafa.org. Membership is open to anyone who supports our mission, and the first year of membership is free. VAFA currently has three areas of focus: preventing and mitigating pain experienced by farm animals, promoting living environments that meet the animal's physical and psychological needs, and lastly, ensuring humane end-of-life practices. As part of the living environments focus area, VAFA works to advance housing systems that protect animals from disease and injury and provide opportunities for natural behavioral expression, agency, and positive engagement with their environment and conspecifics. Related to today's webinar, we have a position statement on sow and gilt gestation housing available on our website. Today's webinar involves three speakers and will explore federal efforts to undo state laws such as Proposition 12 and Question 3 that prohibit the extreme confinement of farm animals. As I mentioned, I'm Dr. Abby Zoltik. In addition to being a veterinarian, I'm board certified in animal welfare and conduct research on sow and piglet behavior and welfare. Our next speaker, Dr. Gwendy Reyes-Ilg, is VAFA president and co-executor. Gwendy is a veterinarian with a background in veterinary and animal ethics. As a co-author of a brief to the Supreme Court opposing legal efforts to undo Proposition 12, she reviewed decades of published research on sow housing systems and their impacts on animal welfare. Our last speaker is Cameron Cryer-Massey, VAFA co-executive director. Cameron is a lawyer and holds graduate degrees in public health and animal welfare. For more than 15 years, she has worked for and with members of Congress on advancing policies related to human and animal health. So after the presentation, we'll follow up with the question and answer session. Throughout the webinar, you're welcome to submit your questions through the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen, and we will address as many of these questions as time permits. So we're going to start off with sow behavior and gestation housing, and I'm going to be discussing highly motivated behaviors in sows, the impact of gestation crate use on sow welfare, and group housing as an alternative to extreme confinement. And I want to begin by walking us through a commercial sow's reproductive cycle, beginning with breeding. So this is when the sow is inseminated. If she conceives, she'll then go through approximately 16 weeks of gestation. She will then farrow or give birth to her piglets. She then nurses her piglets, and this period lasts about 3 weeks on most commercial operations in the US. Her piglets are then weaned, so they're going to be sent either to a nursery or a grow finish operation, and then the cycle is going to repeat. And typically on facilities that crate sows, the sow is crated during all these phases of her reproductive cycle. So what is a gestation crate? It is an approximately 7 by 2 foot metal structure designed to severely restrict the movement of the sow so she can't turn around. And she's in this crate for the entirety of gestation. She can't freely exit. So why are they used? Now, many of these reasons can be refuted, but from an industry perspective, crates are used, first of all, to reduce labor. So as an example, because the sow is unable to turn around, she can only urinate and defecate in the area directly behind her, streamlining cleaning. When a sow is in a crate, less handling and restraint skills are required, and workers are considered more protected from potential sow aggression, though sow aggression is much less common during the period of gestation. When sows are crated separately, they can be fed an individualized diet, although there are alternative feeding systems available for group house sows, and I'll touch on that later. Crates are also used to prevent fighting among sows. And lastly, crates enable more sows to be housed per unit area, reducing overall building space cost. So what can a sow do in a crate? she can perform only the most basic behaviors. So she can stand up, she can lie down, she can drink water, and she can eat at the designated time when her food is delivered, and she can urinate and defecate, but she can't choose where she does this. Now, Proposition 12 is going to be discussed in greater detail throughout the course of this webinar, but I want to briefly introduce this law. So it's a voter-approved California law that sets minimum space requirements for several farm animal species. And I'm going to be focused on requirements for breeding pigs specifically. So in the section titled Breeding Pig Confinement, Proposition 12 states that any pork product sold in California must be from farms with space allowances of at least 24 square feet per sow. So, in other words, Proposition 12 prohibits the sale of pork within California from the offspring of sows housed in extreme confinement. Now, Proposition 12 also requires that the sow be able to lie down, stand up, fully extend all limbs without touching the side of the enclosure or another animal, and turn around freely, or turn around in a complete circle, again without touching the enclosure or another animal. And we see in this graphic from the California Department of Agriculture, Exhibit A represents a standard crate, so it doesn't meet the space requirements and the sow cannot turn around. Exhibit B, we see, meets the space requirements, but the sow is not able to turn around. So only Exhibit C is Prop 12 compliant. It meets both the space requirements and it allows the sow to turn around freely. Proposition 12 also includes a section titled Confinement Standards Exceptions, which permits sow confinement 5 days before she farrows and throughout lactation, or when she's nursing her piglets. And I want to quickly mention that the term sow in Prop 12 also refers to gilts, or female pigs that have not yet had their first litter of piglets. So jumping back to the sow's reproductive cycle, I want to emphasize that Proposition 12 only impacts this post-weaning period, so when the sow comes into estrus and is bred, which is about 1 week, and the period of gestation. So the sow is permitted to be crated during the other phases of her cycle, so when she gives birth and when she nurses her piglets. It's really important to understand sow behavior to fully appreciate the impact of gestation crates on sow welfare. And this takes us back to her ancestral roots and the genetic selection that led to the domestic sow that we now raise for commercial purposes. So the domestic sow was bred for an increased body size and increased leanness, as well as much larger litter sizes. So looking at these images of the wild boar sow and the domesticated sow, we see that phenotypically they're quite different. But the important question that we have to ask is, has her behavior changed? And what we find is that the mind of the pig, so her behavioral motivations, how she interacts with the world, has remained remarkably unchanged. In the Edinburgh Pig Park study from 1989, researchers released intensively reared commercial pigs into a semi-natural environment. And what they found is that the pigs reverted to their ancestral behaviors. So they traveled together, they foraged, slept in communal nests, and studies that followed confirmed these findings. Pigs retain the behaviors of their wild ancestors. So these are biologically hardwired behaviors that have not been erased by genetic selection. And I'm going to highlight some of these behaviors that pigs are still highly motivated to perform, focusing only on behaviors during gestation. Again, Prop 12 requirements don't affect farrowing or lactation, so I'm not going to cover maternal behaviors. So to begin, pigs are highly social animals. In the wild, they live in these stable matrilineal social groups and they synchronize activities. And a common misconception is that pigs are naturally aggressive and territorial. But pigs actually create stable hierarchies to minimize dominance-related aggression, and they practice conflict avoidance. And there are deeply rooted evolutionary reasons for these behaviors. So there is safety in numbers, it's more efficient to work cooperatively. There are also stress buffering effects of social engagement. So there is evidence that pigs seek social contact in stressful situations and mitigate stress through affiliative interactions like social nosing. Another highly motivated behavior is foraging and the associated movement. So when provided the opportunity, pigs will devote the majority of their active hours to foraging. And this behavior has obvious value. It helps with food procurement and environmental awareness so that she can avoid aversive situations and locate valuable resources. The associated cognitive engagement prevents her from becoming bored. And exercise is also really critical for muscle and bone development and strengthening. Pigs are also highly motivated to seek comfort and engage in what we call body maintenance or cleanliness behaviors. And studies demonstrate that when provided the choice, pigs will choose to lie on soft, dry, organic surfaces compared to hard, wet surfaces. Pigs also practice what we call functional zonation. So this is where they will organize their living space into these functional zones. So they'll separate, for example, areas of rest and areas of eating from areas that are designated for dunging. Pigs also adjust their behavior based on ambient temperature. And this is not to say that every pig needs a muddy pool to wallow in to have good welfare. There are other ways that pigs adjust their behavior based on ambient temperature, including seeking different degrees of light exposure or different lying surfaces based on substrate or temperature gradients. And these behaviors are really critical for hygiene, health, and comfort. Thermoregulation is particularly critical for pigs because they have very minimal sweat glands. So what is a sow unable to do in a crate? She cannot turn around or choose the orientation in which she lies. She cannot walk, run, or explore. She has no agency over her own comfort, so she can't seek direct physical contact with other pigs or engage socially. She can't adjust her behavior to mitigate uncomfortable environmental conditions like excessive heat. Also related to comfort and health, she can't engage in these body maintenance or cleanliness behaviors like functional zonation, relieving herself in an area distant from where she eats and sleeps, or choosing a clean, dry lying surface. And lastly, she can't forage, a behavior that we know a pig will perform for the majority of her active hours when given the opportunity. So not only do sows express behaviors that are not possible to perform in a crate, in controlled studies, they also exhibit behaviors that indicate a desire for more space. So in a recent study, Eid et al. Provided gilts with the choice between a free access stall, so a stall that they could both enter and exit, and open space with resources distributed equally. And they found that gilts demonstrated a significant preference for open space compared to a crate. These same researchers then went a step further to study how motivated a gilt is to exit a closed crate. So they mounted locked crates with an apparatus that measured pushing events. And they found that all gilts demonstrated some level of motivation to exit the crate, reporting that gilts pushed on the exit of the crate 41 to 173 times over the course of a single hour. So together, these studies provide evidence that crates are aversive to pigs. Now, the inability to perform highly motivated behaviors, which requires this freedom of space, leads to negative physical and psychological outcomes. So sows in extreme confinement are more likely to develop decubitus ulcers or pressure sores. So they can't easily shift position in a crate. The flooring is hard, and pigs are genetically selected for less subcutaneous fat, so they have less cushioning. And all these factors associated with confinement predispose her to this pressure sore formation. Crated sows also demonstrate muscle and bone weakening, predisposing them to fractures. And confinement can also lead to compromised cardiovascular function. Lastly, sows in extreme confinement are predisposed to urinary tract infections as they're unable to distance themselves from where they urinate and defecate. And this is compounded by an abnormal behavior adopted by many sows in confinement called dog sitting. Negative psychological outcomes include abnormal behavioral expression. So stereotypies are these repetitive, seemingly functionless behaviors, and these include bar biting, or when a sow repeatedly bites at the bars of the crate, and sham chewing, or when a sow engages in these repetitive chewing motions in the absence of food. And chronic hunger also likely contributes to these oral stereotypies, as gestating sows are generally feed restricted. We also see crated sows allocate more of their activity budget to sleep and recumbency because of the stimulus poor environment. And we also can see low responsiveness, so the sow doesn't react normally to stimuli. She has this diminished or absent response. And stereotypies have been described as a coping mechanism, so a way to cope with these barren stimulus poor environments. And they may be indicative of anxiety, depression, boredom, frustration, and stress. So how can we house sows in a way that is Prop 12 compliant and improves welfare? We have the option to provide group or open housing for sows. And in these systems, sows are housed together in groups, and we have the flexibility to tailor the system to the individual farm. And this is in terms of housing design, management practices, feeding system, and breeding strategies. So group housing is not this one-size-fits-all solution. It doesn't take away choices, it opens up opportunities for more choices. So more environmental choices for the pigs and more design and management options for producers. And there are questions about how to optimize group housing systems. So in terms of providing individually tailored diets, minimizing aggression, and ensuring that sow conception rates aren't negatively affected. And we don't have time today to address the methods and strategies for optimizing group housing systems. We will be providing publicly accessible resources after this webinar. Briefly, I want to mention that there are resources available to guide and support, for example, feeding system decisions. This is a decision tree and chart from Prairie Swine Center as an example. They also have a website, sowhousing.com, which I really encourage you to go to if you have more questions about this. There are also resources that provide guidance on preventing and mitigating inter-sow aggression. We know that sows are not naturally aggressive animals, so there are ways that we can facilitate positive social interactions by modifying her environment to accommodate her behavioral needs. Lastly, I want to mention that group housing systems have been successfully implemented and championed by farmers throughout North America. And a 2021 survey conducted by the US Department of Agriculture showed that approximately 52% of small farms, 82% of medium farms, and 38% of large farms use group housing systems for gestation. Thank you very much for your attention, and I'm now going to turn things over to Gwendy.
Okay, is the screen share working all right?
Looks great.
Yes.
Well, thanks for that great part of the presentation, Abby. As Abby mentioned, I'm Dr. Gwendy Reyes-Zilk, and in my portion of the presentation, I am going to be providing a review of state laws that prohibit certain forms of extreme confinement. Just one second, I'll get this, having a little advancing issue. There we go. I'm also going to explain the difference between state laws that implement a production ban and those that implement a sales ban. I will review the lawsuit challenging Prop 12 that went to the Supreme Court and provide examples of past veterinary advocacy on this issue. So as many of you know, millions of pigs, calves, and chickens are confined in spaces so small they can't perform even the most basic natural behaviors, such as turning around or stretching their wings. Gestation crates, veal crates, and battery cages cause physical harm to animals' bodies and cause psychological suffering by frustrating, highly motivated behavioral drives. Because of this, a growing number of states are passing legislation to prohibit intensive confinement crates for gestating sows and calves raised for veal and battery cages for egg-laying hens. Since 2002, 15 states have passed laws protecting farm animals from extreme confinement. You can see them on this map published in 2022 by the USDA. We have just updated the map to include New Jersey, which passed gestation crate and veal crate laws in 2023. Some states passed ballot initiatives for this purpose, while others have taken legislative pathways. There's also variation in terms of which species of animals are covered and when precisely extreme confinement is prohibited. For example, some cage-free egg laws exempt pullets or juvenile hens, and some laws only prohibit the use of gestation crates after the sow has been confirmed to be pregnant. So sows in these states may still spend several weeks in gestation crates and even longer if they don't conceive when they're first inseminated. On this map, states are color-coded based on how many animal confinement or retail sales policies they have. So Florida is in red because the state's law prohibits only intensive confinement of sows, whereas California is in dark green because they have 5 different policies, including 3 that relate to the sale of certain products produced using the prohibited housing systems. For the purposes of our presentation today, we're going to focus on laws restricting the use of gestation crates. And it's important to understand the 2 different types of laws that are used by states, because this provides context to both the Supreme Court case and the current controversy in Congress related to the Farm Bill. A production ban means the use of gestation crates is restricted or prohibited in that state. Since 2002, 11 states have passed this type of law. Those are Arizona, California, Colorado, Florida, Maine, Massachusetts, Michigan, New Jersey, Ohio, Oregon, and Rhode Island. In many of the states that have farm animal production policies, the amount of pork, veal, and eggs produced within the state is limited compared with the amount consumed. Therefore, those products are often imported from other states. As a result, some states also restrict sales of egg, pork, and veal products from operations that use prohibited practices, no matter what state the animal was raised in. Sales bans are attractive not only because they provide consumers with options that better align with their values around the treatment of farm animals, but also because they essentially recognize animal welfare as a public good. So rather than putting the burden of finding higher welfare animal products on individual consumers, sales bans distribute the responsibility and costs of improving animal welfare and production systems. While the egg and veal industries have adapted to these retail sales bans, the pork industry has strongly resisted them, resulting in sales bans being more controversial than those dealing simply with production. California and Massachusetts have both passed a sales ban related to extreme confinement of mother pigs. This means that if a producer wants to sell certain pork products for consumption in these states, they must abide by the housing requirements set forth in these laws. Abby touched on this briefly, but I want to go into a little further detail on what the sales bans in California and Massachusetts do and don't do. Prop 12 was passed in California in 2018 with the support of 63% of voters. Both laws are to a degree just grounded in common sense. They recognize what most people have, I think, as an intuition that for farm animals to have a minimally acceptable quality of life, they must be able to move their own bodies, at least most of the time. So Prop 12 requires that animal enclosures permit the animal to stand up, lie down, fully extend their limbs, and turn around freely. In addition, Prop 12 sets specific space requirements for the animals covered by the law. There has, of course, been a lot of discussion about the requirement of 24 square feet per sow. For example, we've been asked by journalists, where did that space requirement come from of 24 square feet? So first of all, it's important to keep in mind that 24 square feet is a minimum. Like Abby mentioned, an individual pen that measures 4 feet by 6 feet or 8 feet by 3 feet would not be acceptable under Prop 12 for many or probably most pregnant pigs because, as we know from experience and from research, adult pregnant pigs usually cannot turn around in such a small amount of space. This 2011 paper, Turning Around by Pregnant Sows, goes into great detail about this. But the 24 square foot requirement also applies to group housing systems. So you have to have 24 square feet per sow. And depending on how many sows you have in the pen, that determines the full size of the pen. There's been definitely a lot of research done on group housing and how the space per sow impacts animal welfare. It's generally accepted that all other things being equal, you're going to have less aggression and injuries and thus better welfare in group housing systems where you have more space per animal. I don't think anyone would argue that allowing 24 square feet per sow magically guarantees good or even adequate animal welfare, and many other factors impact welfare aside from just the amount of space per animal. When VAFA inquired as to the origin of that 24 square foot space requirement, we learned that a range of sources had been considered. So one is the European Union directive, which requires group housing systems provide at least 2.25 square meters, which is about 24 square feet, per sow. Other sources that were consulted include the Canadian Code of Practice and several animal welfare programs that certify US farms. Massachusetts question 3 was a ballot measure that passed in 2016 and became effective in 2022. And it was supported by an even larger majority, about 78% of voters. Question 3 is similar to Prop 12 in its general requirements. So certain animal products can't be sold in the state unless they come from animals who were able to stand up, lie down, fully extend their limbs, and turn around freely. The law includes a space requirement for hens, but not for sows or calves raised for veal. And like Prop 12, Massachusetts question 3 doesn't apply to every pork product, but only whole, uncooked cuts of meat. So combination products and processed or prepared food products are exempted from both Prop 12 and question 3. The impending effect of the sales ban included in California's Proposition 3 has prompted both legal actions by pork industry advocacy groups and proposed legislation from members of Congress representing major pork producing states. The National Pork Producers Council, in tandem with the American Farm Bureau Federation, filed a suit against several California officials in the US Court of Appeals for the Ninth Circuit. They were attempting to strike down the Proposition 12 sales ban on pork from gestation crate systems. The case and its appeal were dismissed in July of 2021. However, in March of 2022, the Supreme Court announced it would review the challenge. The court reviewed whether Prop 12 was constitutional under what's called the Dormant Commerce Clause. The case was definitely not about sow welfare and gestation crates specifically, but instead whether the power of a state to regulate activities outside of its border, in this case sow housing systems, was constitutional. So NPPC, that's the National Pork Producers Council, claimed that the Dormant Commerce Clause allowed the courts to overrule the state law because it imposed an undue burden on interstate commerce. The Supreme Court ultimately upheld the state law and said NPPC failed to substantiate an undue burden claim. The court determined that a regulation that generates in-state moral benefits to the detriment of out-of-state businesses does not discriminate against interstate commerce in the manner prescribed by the Dormant Commerce Clause. The court also repeatedly mentioned that Congress has the authority to intervene on this issue. So the court said that NPPC was free to petition Congress and that they had the power to preempt or overturn state laws. Justice Gorsuch also wondered whether NPPC had pursued the courts because it was easier to get a handful of judges to agree with their position than getting a majority of senators and representatives to do so. There have also been some attempts to overturn question 3 via the courts, but so far these have all failed as well. In March, a group of pork producers requested that the Supreme Court review these lower court decisions, but the justices have yet to decide whether to grant this request. This foreshadows what Cameron will cover in the next section about how this fight has moved from the courts to Congress. But before she goes into those details, I do want to note the role that veterinarians play during the Supreme Court challenge of Prop 12. As many of you know, veterinarians take an oath to use our scientific knowledge and skills for the benefit of society through the protection of animal health and welfare and the prevention and relief of animal suffering. VAFAW's position is that given that animal welfare research shows that confining pigs to gestation crates inherently causes significant physical and psychological harm, there is just no way for such housing systems to provide a minimally adequate level of animal welfare. During the Supreme Court case, veterinarians submitted amicus briefs on both sides of the issue. And just in case you haven't heard that term before, an amicus brief is a legal document that is filed by a party that's not part of the court case. It offers additional information or arguments to help the court make a decision. In the Prop 12 Supreme Court case, one veterinary group, the American Association of Swine Veterinarians, or AASV, filed an amicus brief in support of the National Pork Producers Council, arguing that gestation crates are necessary to prevent sow aggression and make sure lower-ranking sows can obtain food. And I'll mention that all of these, if you would like to read the briefs, they will be available in the version of the presentation that we make available in the coming days. So we'll just go over the rest of these briefly. Some of the other VAFA founders, along with other veterinarians, we together helped author a brief submitted on behalf of nearly 400 vets and animal welfare scientists that responded to points in the AASV brief. We noted that much of the research cited in the AASV brief was extremely outdated, and we brought in more recent science. We argued that gestation crates are incompatible with good animal welfare, that alternatives to gestation crates can better address pregnant pigs' needs, and that no scientific consensus supports the use of gestation crates. Another brief was written and submitted by the American Public Health Association, along with independent veterinarians working in related fields, and a few other health-focused groups. They argued that use of gestation crates threatens public health and consumer safety because sows confined to these crates experience high stress levels and associated immunosuppression. This results in an increased risk that mother pigs will transmit pathogens to their offspring, potentially resulting in contaminated pork products, increased use of antibiotics, and thus antibiotic resistance. Two individual veterinarians with long careers in animal agriculture submitted a third brief in support of Prop 12, arguing that the husbandry changes required to comply with Prop 12 were not an insurmountable burden for out-of-state pork producers, as the National Pork Producers Council was arguing. And finally, another large animal vet submitted an amicus brief that explained issues associated with traceability of pork products. His brief demonstrated the inaccuracy of NPPC's claims that a cut of pork could not be traced back to a specific sow housing system. So veterinarian arguments were not at the heart of the legal question, but the justices definitely took note of the controversy within the veterinary community. If you listen to the oral arguments, Justice Gorsuch mentions that NPPC was asking the justices to balance the testimony of veterinary experts on both sides of the issue, a job that he thought was better suited to Congress than the courts. So I am going to pass it off to Cameron now for the last part of our presentation.
Okay, great. Thank you, Gwendy. Now we turn to what has been unfolding in Congress. In this part of the webinar, I'll briefly explain the Farm Bill and how it's become a vehicle for Prop 12 preemption language. provide an overview of legislative efforts to preempt or overturn Prop 12. And to be clear, federal preemption occurs when the federal government exercises its constitutional authority to override, displace, or invalidate a state law. And this action not only undoes existing state laws, but it also prevents states from adopting similar laws going forward. I'll also highlight the AVMA's record of supporting Prop 12 preemption, provide details of VAFAW educational and advocacy activities, and explain several ways you can engage on this issue. So what is the Farm Bill? It is broad legislation that governs a wide variety of agriculture and food programs. The bill is typically passed every 5 years. It was last passed in 2018. It should have been renewed in 2023, but disagreements over various provisions have interrupted the process. Several short-term extensions have been passed to keep most of the 2018 Farm Bill in place. And it also provides a vehicle for policymakers to advance their legislative priorities. This chart helps show the process the Farm Bill must go through to become law. And as you can see, there are a lot of hurdles, and it can be confusing, especially if you're hearing this for the first time. So I'll try to walk through this slowly. Congress is made up of two sides, or we call them chambers, the House and the Senate. Both sides get to write their version of a farm bill and decide what is included. Once the House bill writes its version of the bill, it must be approved by the Agriculture Committee and then by the full House of Representatives. The Senate version of the bill must be approved by the Senate Agriculture Committee and then all members of the Senate. So think of this as two parallel tracks. Eventually, however, any differences between the House and Senate versions of the bill must be reconciled. This is typically done through a conference committee made up of members from both chambers. The conference committee negotiates a final version of the bill and decides which provisions will be included. The bill is then sent back through both the House and Senate for a final vote, and assuming it passes, goes on to the president. It's important to understand the process because as you receive advocacy action alerts and we ask for you to contact your members of Congress, it may seem that you are doing the same thing over and over again. That's because there are so many steps to this process, and each step may involve a critical window to influence lawmakers. The process has had a series of stops and starts over the past several years, and it's still unclear whether the bill will make it through the entire process this year. But we know that passing a farm bill is a priority for the president and Republican leaders on both House and Senate committees. So where do things stand now? On the House side, the bill has made it through several important steps, including being approved by the House Ag Committee and passed by the entire U.S. House of Representatives. And this is important. The House version of the Farm Bill includes language that will preempt Prop 12 and Question 3. The Senate has now started the process of writing its version of the Farm Bill, which will be different from what the House did. The Senate Ag Committee is expected to mark up or review their version of the bill later this month or early next. If you live in a state with a Senate Ag Committee member representative, you may remember seeing an advocacy alert about this a few weeks ago. We've been working to ensure the Senate version of the bill does not include the same preemption language as the House. Robust efforts have been made by members of Congress for more than 10 years to prevent or override states' ability to regulate out-of-state agriculture practices. And this slide shows you the numerous Senate and House bills that have been introduced. They all have differences. Some are more narrowly tailored, but the primary intent is to prevent states from regulating agriculture and or livestock practices in another state. If I went through the detail of all of these bills. It would most certainly put you to sleep. So I'm just going to focus on the EATS Act and Save Our Bacon, because those are most likely to be the bills that you've heard about, if you've heard of any, and the ones that have gotten have gained the most traction in Congress. The EATS Act was introduced in 2021 and then again in 2023 with a slightly different name. Both bills were aimed at limiting state regulation of ag production occurring outside of the state. The Senate version of the bill was led by Senator Roger Marshall from Kansas. And just remember that name because I will circle back to it shortly. The EATS Act was scaled down and included in the 2024 Farm Bill as Section 12007, which would have prohibited states from imposing certain production standards on livestock and livestock-derived products produced in other states. The 2024 Farm Bill never completed the legislative process. It passed out of the Ag Committee, but never made it to the House floor for a full vote. Now we've started the process again with different preemption language rebranded as the Save Our Bacon Act. It's narrower in scope from the EATS Act, and it was incorporated as Section 12006 in the House version of the 2026 Farm Bill. That bill has made it through the committee and was passed by the full House of Representatives in April. So let's take a closer look at Section 12006. And again, this is the language included in the House version of the Farm Bill. Section 12006 says no state may enact or enforce directly or indirectly as a condition for sale or consumption any condition or standard of production on products derived from covered livestock not physically raised in such state. The provision applies to covered livestock, which is defined as animals raised for slaughter for human consumption, and dairy animals producing milk-derived products. It does not include animals raised for egg production. The bill also limits the definition of production to the raising and breeding of livestock. It does not include state requirements related to transportation, slaughter, harvesting, processing, or other post-production activities. So remember when Gwendy detailed the difference between a production ban and a sales ban, this is really striking at the sales ban that Proposition 12 and Question 3 put in place. A reminder of where things stand now, because I know this can all be very confusing. As I mentioned, the House has passed its version of the Farm Bill, which included Section 12006, the preemption provision. Now our focus has turned to the Senate. As of today, June 16th, we are awaiting Senate bill language and the Ag Committee review of their bill. The chairman of the Ag Committee has said he does not plan to include preemption language in the base text of the Senate Farm Bill, which is great progress, but we do think several senators on the committee will try to have language added in as an amendment. So we are focusing our efforts to ensure preemption language is not included in the Senate bill. The veterinary perspective is critically important to the debate because of the impact of extreme confinement on animal welfare. So I think it's important to highlight the position the American Veterinary Medical Association, or AVMA, has taken on this legislation. In May of 2024, and most recently in April of 2026, the AVMA sent letters to the leaders of the House Ag Committee offering, quote, strong support of the preemption provision. The letters state that they are on behalf of more than 100,000 member veterinarians. Unless you've been tracking this issue closely, you may not have seen these letters. From what we can tell, they are not on the AVMA website, nor were they included in member updates about the Farm Bill. The National Pork Producers Council has posted the letters on their website and have routinely referenced them in their advocacy materials. The American Association of Swine Veterinarians is also on record as supportive of preemption. Lawmakers, including the chair of the House Ag Committee, have used these letters from the AVMA and other materials to say veterinarians are in support of preemption. I also want to highlight the AVMA passed a new policy on sow housing in July of last year that specifically encourages housing systems that allow sows and piglets to express highly motivated behaviors while avoiding or minimizing expression of abnormal repetitive behaviors and aggression. As Abby highlighted, modern science demonstrates the inability of gestation crates to permit expression of nearly all highly motivated behaviors. Thus, housing sows in gestation crates would not meet the recommendations in the new policy. We feel this updated policy and an AVMA resolution encouraging the swine industry to transition to group housing calls into question the AVMA's position to endorse Prop 12 preemption. VAFA has engaged in a number of educational and advocacy activities for more than a year to raise awareness about sow welfare, housing systems, and federal efforts to preempt state laws on the extreme confinement of farm animals. We're working to counter the narrative that the entire veterinary profession is aligned on this issue and supports preemption. This slide includes examples of those activities, including an op-ed recently published in AgriPulse, a publication commonly read by Ag Committee staff members or just Ag staff members in general in Congress. We've had direct meetings in Washington, D.C. with congressional offices and provided commentary to VIN on an article recently published about the debate over Prop 12 preemption. We've also sent a variety of letters to Ag Committee members, including a recent one to the Senate with the Massachusetts Veterinary Medical Association. VAFA has hosted 4 webinars, including the one today on sow welfare. We've sent advocacy alerts to our members and encouraged them to send messages or make phone calls to lawmakers, and been involved with several coalition efforts to protect state laws from preemption. We know that this work takes a village and are so grateful for the many, many organizations that are involved in direct and grassroots advocacy. I do want to flag that the Humane Veterinary Medical Alliance has a sign-on letter to Congress for veterinary professionals. Details are on their website, and we will post a link to that shortly. If what you have heard today makes you motivated or increases your existing motivation to engage on this issue, there are a number of suggestions on how to do that. Your perspectives, especially those grounded in veterinary medicine, research, and animal agriculture, are absolutely critical to this debate. Several suggestions. If you are not already a member of VAFA, we encourage you to become one. Membership is free for the first year, and this will ensure you receive notices about educational and advocacy opportunities on this issue and others related to our policy priorities. If you live in the US, please complete the advocacy actions using the VAFA platform. This platform allows you to send a message directly to your members of Congress. Action takes just a few minutes. VAFA will provide a template message that you can customize, and then using your address, the platform sends it to your member of Congress. Any response the lawmaker provides goes directly to you. Make sure that VAFA emails aren't going to your spam folder. We will send a notice when engagement is critically needed. We're trying to be strategic when we ask our members to take action and know that your time and capacity is limited. I mentioned that we're awaiting activity by the Senate Ag Committee. Members on that committee represent the following states. If you live in one of these states, we consider you a key advocate at this point in the process. If you haven't done so already, please use our advocacy platform to send a message to your senator. Details are at vafa.org/sows-need-space. If you're comfortable using social media, help amplify information about opposition to Prop 12 and be sure to tag your members of Congress. You can submit a letter to the editor of your local paper and mention your members of Congress so that it shows up in their clips. If you need help with drafting, feel free to email us at info@vafa.org. Last, if you're a member of the AVMA, we encourage you to reach out to your delegate and district director and ask the AVMA to withdraw its support of Prop 12 preemption. When you log into your AVMA account, their contact info appears on the very first page. We suggest short, respectful emails, and you may need to reach out by phone because sometimes those email accounts are not checked. We know these grassroots efforts work, and I'll end with a bit of good news. Most recently, Senator Roger Marshall from Kansas, who serves on the Ag Committee and has been a leader on preemption efforts, has reversed his position and no longer supports federal action. This was a result of coordinated advocacy and media efforts, and just an example of constituent action, and that your voice can really make a difference. So that concludes our formal remarks. We're now going to have a short question and answer session. Please feel free to submit discussion questions by tapping the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. A few comments for those who may need to sign off now. We encourage you to fill out the evaluation form that will pop up on your screen at the end of the webinar. It will also be sent to you by email. The evaluation form provides valuable feedback about this webinar and future events. Also, this webinar is RACE approved for CE credit for veterinarians and veterinary technicians who are VAFAW members. We will provide a free certificate of participation. Will be emailed in the coming days to vets and vet techs that attended today's discussion. A recording of today's webinar will be posted on the VAFAW website. Links to many of the documents referenced in the webinar, as well as access to the advocacy platform, are at vafa.org/SowsNeedSpace. If you need to reach us for any reason, please feel free to email info@vafa.org. And we can now turn to any questions that have been